Welcome to the IRES seminar series for today, a student seminar. So we've got Caleb and Yoshi speaking. So we'll start with our land acknowledgement here we're gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And for today's land acknowledgement, I want to consider a bit the relationships between the Coast Salish peoples and interior Salish. And so this aspect is relevant today in particular, as Caleb was doing his research in partnership with the Sinn Indian band, who's a part of the Secwepemc Nation. And so here, thinking about the lands and waters and the resources that First Nations derive from those, and then also traded with Indigenous peoples in more interior areas, are really important and have been occurring for millennia. This includes trade in ulacan, an oily fish that spawns in BC rivers all up and down the coast, including in the Fraser River, although the populations are low now compared to historical levels. And so that has been referred to as the grease trails, because these oily fish were then transported both as oil and as oily fish between the coast and interior along physical trails that were linking communities, but also kind of cultural trails and connections. So quite important, these relationships between Indigenous peoples groups. And then there's also political histories that are intertwined between Coast Salish and interior Salish. For example, in 1906, representatives from Coast and interior Salish nations joined together in a delegation traveling to England to lobby the king, sharing their concerns over land and resources, how they were being managed, mismanaged, denied, expropriated, et cetera, and the lack of treaties in British Columbia. And so those delegates included people from Cowichan Nation, which is on Vancouver Island, the Secwepemc in the interior, Squamish, and Musqueam nations. So yeah, just a long history of engagement between the peoples of the coast and people of the interior that continues to this day in cultural and political and economic means. And so then I want to turn and introduce Caleb Sinn, a master's student in IRES, second year, began I guess a year and a half ago or so, and has been really engaged on this project, looking at a post-fire landscape in interior BC in partnership with, as I mentioned, the Sinn Indian band. So Caleb, his research interests include the use of ecosystem ecology to support stewardship and management of freshwater systems at the watershed scale. He has a BS in general science with a double major in biology and chemistry from the University of Alberta. And after his undergrad, he worked as program manager at the Alberta Lakes Management Society, where he managed year-round monitoring and of community-based lake monitoring programs. And in his free time, he enjoys cooking, gardening, trail running, walking his dog, and napping with his cat. All right, so with that, let's give Caleb a welcome here.
Thanks for that, Mark. Can everybody hear me? Is the mic in a good position? Okay, great. Just gonna put this in my back pocket. Get my notes up. All right, yeah, so thanks again for the introduction, Mark. I'm gonna be talking about how we can use metabolism and carbon biogeochemistry as indicators of stream health. And I'm thinking about these indicators for the Deadman River watershed, which is near Kamloops. We're going to jump right into the Deadman River watershed. So the Deadman River watershed is the center of the traditional territory of the Sinn Indian band, who are a community of Secwepemc people. The community depends on the watershed for food, social, cultural, and economic resources. Other land uses in the watershed include agriculture, forestry, recreation, and residents of the watershed rely on the river specifically for drinking, irrigation, and for salmon. And a couple of other fast facts about the watershed is that it's located in the southern interior, close to Kamloops, and drains into the Thompson River. It's a moderately sized watershed at 1,500 square kilometers or 150,000 hectares. It's fairly dry and quite warm. Its mean daily summer temperature is 19 degrees. In 2021, the Sparks Lake fire burned 90,000 hectares, and about half of the water or the fire perimeter occurred within the watershed boundaries, and half of that was of medium or high severity. So this is a very big fire. To kind of give you a scale of this, this is the perimeter of the fire overlaying in Vancouver. So you can kind of see the scale that we're talking about for the fire. And for the southern interior in particular, this is a very large impact that's happening on the land. As a result of the fire, the Sinn received 3-year funding from the BC SRIF, or Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund, for their project, which is called We Repair the Land, which seeks to identify and prioritize risks throughout the watershed, plan and initiate restoration and assess the effectiveness of restoration activities, and then also to develop monitoring and mitigation adaptive management plan. You can kind of see the different aspects of the project. There's a technical advisory group, there's a restoration team, there's a Sinn community that's at the center leading all the efforts, and there's a science team, which is working towards assessing ecosystem health and effectiveness of restoration. And that's where my project fits in. And there's lots of different partners from different academic and government organizations, but that's where my work is situated. So kind of moving towards the science side, when we think about what wildfires will do to stream environments, there's 2 sort of processes that I want to highlight. The first is vegetation loss. So you can see all the burnt areas that are in the tree canopy. And then there's also these changes to soil, both physical characteristics of the soil, which impacts how water runs off, but also chemical changes as well, related to ash deposition and other burnt residues. So these 2 processes, what they mean for rivers and streams is that there's going to be a change in hydrology. So there's going to be increased flow and flashiness of the river and an earlier snow melt. There's going to be changes to the geomorphology, so increased erosion and delivery of sediment to the river. Water quality is going to change as well. There's going to be a pulse of nutrients and other changes to water chemistry. And then finally, the aquatic environment is going to change a little bit as well. There's going to be less shade due to the loss of vegetation, and there's going to be higher temperatures related to the increased light, but also the turbidity is going to, and the water, the sediment's going to hold on to more energy. So in this kind of landscape, fire is a natural part of the ecosystem and actually can support health. But with changes in fire regime, we're seeing more intense, more severe and higher frequency of fires. And this can kind of flip some of the benefits to becoming more risks to what we consider ecosystem health. So what I mean when I say a healthy stream is I really like this definition from Judy Meyer, which is that a healthy stream will be sustainable and resilient, maintaining its ecological structure and function while continuing to meet societal needs and expectations. So I think the key part of this definition is that there's the ecological integrity side. So a healthy stream will support biodiversity and ecosystem functions, but there's this recognition that a healthy stream will also benefit humans as well and support human values. And this kind of goes along with this idea of ecosystem services, which include provisioning, maintaining, and regulating, and cultural services as well. When I map some of these onto Sitchison's values and what we can use to dictate the health of stream ecosystems in the Deadman watershed, some of their value components are aquatic habitat for biodiversity in general, but especially for coho and chinook and steelhead, as those are important species for the community. Water quality for irrigation and for drinking water, and then fisheries, so that the fisheries are productive and sustainable. So when we think about those values, what can we use to assess stream health? And I'm going to present 2 different ways of thinking about stream health. They're certainly not the only 2 ways, but they're the ways that I'm thinking about. So the first is aquatic ecosystem metabolism. So metabolism represents organic carbon that's produced through photosynthesis, which is called gross primary productivity, and also organic carbon that's degraded through respiration, or otherwise known as ecosystem respiration. And these processes together estimate what's at the base of the food web and how energy is used at the ecosystem scale. And what I mean by that is that the gross primary productivity process happens at the base of the food web. So you can think about algae, even macrophytes that are in the water are contributing to this GPP signal. But ecosystem respiration is going to happen at the entire ecosystem or food web scale as well, because every organism is using up energy, and that results in a respiration of CO2. And that's why I have this figure here, which kind of shows how these two processes are related to changing dynamics of dissolved gases, primarily oxygen and CO2. And net ecosystem productivity is the sum of these two. As GPP is an addition to oxygen or carbon, it'll be positive, and as respiration is a consumption of oxygen and organic carbon, it's going to be negative. And so those two balance out together is the net ecosystem productivity. And the kind of things that will drive ecosystem metabolism include stream flow, temperature, light, nutrients, and organic matter, which will all be impacted by effects of wildfire on the land. The other way I'm thinking about it is carbon biogeochemistry. And I'm really honing in on the dissolved fraction of the total carbon pool that's going to be in a river, because it's important for providing energy to the ecosystem, and it will regulate the availability of nutrients and also toxicity of certain contaminants in the aquatic environment. It's also a key component of drinking water treatability. One of the main steps of treating water is actually removing this dissolved organic matter so that you have a reduced disinfection byproduct formation, and also so that the water tastes better and looks better. Its composition will reflect where it's coming from, how it's being used in the environment, and the impacts of climate, land use, and the terrestrial ecosystem. And when we're thinking about it in a river, it can come either from the terrestrial environment and kind of get washed into the river, or it can be produced from within the stream by autotrophic organisms that will photosynthesize. And wildfire may impact the quantity and quality of the terrestrial dissolved organic matter that's going to come into the river. And it also has the potential to change how DOM is produced within the stream. So this kind of leads to my overall question and objective. So the main question is how we can use those two indicators to reflect stream health in the Deadman River watershed. And this kind of leads into three different objectives. The first is to determine the characteristics and drivers of metabolism in two rivers in particular. The next is to characterize the carbon biogeochemical composition and export and assess how it varies through space and time in both of those rivers. And then to translate both of those into assessments of stream ecosystem health throughout the watershed. So how I'm doing this is I was part of the field campaign with a lot of the other partners in the project, where 8 sampling locations were selected in the upper Deadman watershed, outlined in blue, and in the Chris Creek. And the reason why Chris Creek is being sampled as well is because it's a primary tributary of the Deadman. You can see just how large of an area it encompasses. So at peak flow, when the snow is melting, Chris Creek actually has a higher flow than the Deadman. So it's a very important stream in terms of the overall aquatic environment throughout the Deadman. So there's various locations on each of the rivers. I want to point out that this Deadman below Mao, which is right below a lake, and that becomes important for how I'm interpreting the results later. So the campaign time span for the field work occurred between April and October 2024. And at each of the sites, except for the site below the lake, there was high frequency data collected: air temperature, air pressure, stream depth, water temp, light, turbidity, and dissolved oxygen. And then there was also a discrete sampling campaign, which meant I was out at these sites every 3 weeks to collect samples for dissolved organic matter quantity and quality and general water chemistry. And I did 9 trips in total between April and October to collect those samples. So once I had those samples on the carbon biogeochemistry side, the samples are run on a total carbon analyzer and an optical spectrometer to get carbon quantity and absorbance and fluorescence information from the samples. And then from that, I calculated different indices that reflect differences in dissolved organic matter composition related to molecular weight, aromaticity, and the source of the dissolved organic matter, whether it's coming from the terrestrial or in-stream environment. And then I did a principal component analysis to assess the variation in composition among sites and across states. On the metabolism side, I modeled GPP and ER using a parameter estimation algorithm through the stream metabolizer R package, which runs on hourly water temperature, air pressure, dissolved oxygen, stream flow, stream height and light to be able to get these high frequency daily representations of our metabolism rates. So when we look at the results of some of the initial analysis that I've done, I'm certainly not done my analysis. I'm only partway through. Thanks. But when we look on the metabolism side, all of the GPP daily rates are green. Ecosystem respiration is brown, and then the net ecosystem productivity is the balance. So what we see when we look at the one site that was modeled from the Deadman is that there's an autotrophic signal in early and later season. That's why the blue is greater, is positive, and that means that it's producing energy from in-stream production, where in the middle of the season it becomes negative. It's more on the ecosystem respiration side, which means that the productivity that's happening, the carbon processing, actually being supported from the terrestrial environment. And then when we look at the Lower Chris Creek site, we see that net ecosystem productivity is always negative, which means that the productivity that's happening in the Lower Chris Creek site there is all coming from carbon that's being supported from the terrestrial environment. And there's similar magnitudes of GPP across both sites, but the Lower Chris site seems to have really flashy periods of ecosystem respiration. And now when I think about these processes in terms of the health, I found a paper that actually published criteria for assessing health of these processes that's based off of a meta-analysis. And generally what we see is the Deadman processes or Deadman metabolic rates are generally within the healthy range for both GPP and ER, but Lower Chris seems to be kind of towing the line between lower and higher in terms of ecosystem respiration. And when GPP and ER are outside of the healthy ranges, it may indicate a risk of habitat stress to fish, so likelihood of lower oxygen or poor food web productivity or organic matter processing. So now jumping over to the dissolved organic matter composition, this is my PCA ordination. I'm sorry, there's a lot going on here, but the main things that I want you to see is that most of the variation in all of my sites are captured on the first axis of the principal component, which reflects differences in if the carbon is produced from within the stream or is coming from the terrestrial environment. All the blue sites are the Deadman sites, all of the green sites are from Chris Creek, and then the orange one is the site that's below the confluence of the two rivers. And the thing that really sticks out to me, that there's actually clear separation between the different Deadman sites, which relate to the position proximity to the lake. So the site that's closest to the lake is the lightest blue, and as the distance from the lake increases, it's darker blue. And that actually kind of maps out more on the variation captured in the second principal component, which the indices that I have mapped reflect whether it's more the dissolved organic matter is influenced by the lake or potentially from anthropogenic sources. So this kind of makes sense as the position from the lake increases, the dissolved organic matter is less characteristic of that lake signal. The Deadman sites being on the right side also mean that more of the dissolved organic matter is characteristic of carbon that's produced within the stream versus the Chris Creek sites, which kind of map more on the left side, which is related to terrestrially derived dissolved organic matter. And now when I want to put this in context and kind of assess, hey, what does this mean for how healthy the stream is? The best thing that I have right now is putting it into context with similar data that's been collected from across Canada. So there was this study in 2024, which used the same indices to characterize dissolved organic matter. And when I ran a PCA on those, the first axis kind of separates the difference between terrestrial and in-stream produced carbon. But more importantly, the second axis maps mainly with this SUVA parameter, which is related to carbon aromaticity, which in the literature has been related to a fire. So a watershed that has been impacted by a fire will generally have more aromatic carbon because that's the more stable kind of carbon. So what this kind of shows us is that all of the Deadman sites, which are in the grayscale, are more related to the SUVA signature and are quite different from the rest of the sites, which to me kind of says that there is still a very strong fire signature even 3 years later in the watershed relative to a lot of other sites across Canada, especially some that are also impacted by fire, such as the taiga plains and the boreal plains. Okay, now to wrap this up and mapping some of my preliminary conclusions on my objectives. The Deadman River is more autotrophic, where Chris Creek displays more flashy heterotrophy. So it's consuming a lot of carbon in very short periods of time, where the Deadman River is using more carbon that's produced from within the river. And the next step is to model more of the sites and determine some of the drivers of metabolism that I introduced earlier. For the carbon biogeochemistry, there's some distinct spatial variability based on differences in terrestrial and in-stream produced dissolved organic matter, as well as how impactful a lake or potential anthropogenic influences are. Next step is to calculate export and carbon use efficiencies and to determine some predictors of carbon composition. And then in regards to the health aspect, there is still a persistent signal of fire when it comes to the dissolved organic matter composition, which has the potential to pose risks to drinking water and aquatic food webs. And on the metabolism side, the flashy heterotrophy in Chris Creek may indicate that there's inefficient carbon processing occur. And the next steps for that is to contextualize metabolism with other streams and assess some of the drivers of metabolism and the predictors of dissolved organic matter through kind of a cumulative impact lens. So both the recent fire, but also historical land use that's happening in the watershed, because the watershed was not pristine before the fire hit. There's still this impact of forestry and agriculture to keep in mind. So just to get to a couple of thank yous, I'm going to go through these really quick because I know I'm out of time. I want to thank my supervisor, Dr. Mark Johnson, for supporting me in this work. A lot of other partners that have really supported. We're supporting each other's work in the Deadman, which just means we have a lot of information to share amongst each other and bounce ideas off of. Rachel and my dog Lucy came out on a field day. I wanted to thank them for coming out, for being my field team that day, but also being my team in life. And finally, I want to thank the Deadman River and the Chris Creek as well, because they taught me a lot and I have a lot to owe them. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah, Josephine. Sure, yeah, I can go back to that. So what's really special about the data set from this Orlova paper is that all of the indices that you see here, SR, BIX, E2, E3, SUVA, Higgs, they can all be calculated from the same kind of instrument, the same optical spectrometer. The one that's being used is the Aqualog. So there's actually, it's the same type of instrument that's getting the same absorbance and fluorescence data that's used to calculate these indicators. And there's really well-established methods and R packages that help to standardize how that kind of data is corrected and normalized so that we can get these indicators. If we compare it to the other PCA that I did, there's more components here that I was able to add to mine, but that I didn't add to the comparison because there is less comparability with being able to put them in the same sort of PCA. Yeah, Claire. Mm. Yeah, I haven't run the PCA without the sites. So this same paper also ran principal component analyses, but they had other indices that they added on that I didn't add. So I think as a next step, I think that's some good advice. I should run it without and see if the sites that the ecozones that I'm saying also have a signal of fire, the taiga plains and the boreal plains also kind of relate to that SUVA index that I'm really kind of honing in on. But yeah, so that's a good idea. Thank you. One more. I've got one more question. Yeah, Simon. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure, and I haven't had a chance to ask. I haven't heard anybody from the project say like that there is a traditional name. I'm sure that there is. It hasn't come up. But I do know that something that's interesting is the Skeetchison name itself actually means the meeting place. So I think the Deadman Valley has been very important for Secwepemc people for actually meeting people from different communities. So that's something that I think about in terms of the Deadman as more of the meeting place instead of being like related to Dead Man, which I think is related to Western people from the West that came in the valley and something happened and that's why somebody died. But I don't think that relates to the traditional name at all. Yeah. Okay, I think that's all I have. Yeah. I'll just say too that I won't be able to stick around for questions afterwards. I gotta run to a meeting, but if you have any other questions, you can email me or you'll probably see me around. So yeah, thank you everybody.
Right. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. I'm super happy to introduce Yoshi Tanaka, who I had the privilege of meeting last year and agreed to supervise his very independent master's thesis. Yoshi did his undergrad here at UBC in the forestry department, and as part of his self-directed study as an undergrad, he did a very, very interesting ethnographic and conversational field work in his ancestral community of Sakayecho, Aichi, Japan. And as part of that study, which I had the chance to read before agreeing to work with him as a master, he looked at kind of emerging evidence or historical evidence of ancient forest stewardship practices such as coppicing, charcoal making, green manure fermentation, but also he found that these processes and traditional ecological knowledge was kind of disappearing from the community. So those kind of undergraduate findings set the stage for his master's thesis, which he's been back to Japan 2 times, I think, this year, to interview his relatives, his elders from the community, and really try to understand kind of where does living knowledge still exist about these traditional practices and which ones have been abandoned and why. So Yoshi has been supported by a SSHRC Canada Graduate Master's Fellowship and also by the Michael Smith Foreign Study Supplement that allowed him to also work with Dr. Fumito Koike at the Graduate School of Environment and Information Science at Yokohama National University in Japan. So we have some nice international collaborations going on here. And I've been really pleased to just see this project evolve with the overarching goal to document these ancestral practices, to enhance forest health, but also to contribute to the overall resilience and well-being of communities like his own across different countries. So looking forward to that.
Thank you so much for wonderful introduction. My name is Yoshinori Tanaka. I go by Yoshi. My research is titled "The Reawakening Traditional Ecological Practices to Revitalize Satoyama Stewardship in Japan, Shifting Japanese Village Culture, Ecosystems, and Adaptability." And as you can see, this is my village. And this is situated in the Aichi prefecture. It's between Tokyo and Osaka in the city of Toyota, where the car company is. But the car company, the city site, urban site is super gray. There's not much of green space, but I'm so lucky that my mother's side ancestors from this beautiful mountain. And in the title, I said Satoyama. The Satoyama is a concept of the Japanese traditional socio-ecological systems that consists the traditional rice paddies and forests for the wood and charcoal making and green manure, and waterway management by the villagers. And it is said to be established about 3,000 years ago, when the agriculture and the metal forging were introduced by the continent people. And Japanese people like us, like I feel like really nostalgic when I hear about the Satoyama. And probably it's really common throughout the Japanese community. And as Hannah was introducing me and then talking about the self-directed study, I did this self-directed study in 2022 with the Dr. Cindy Prescott. And I found these problems in the village. I knew they were there. I wasn't really aware of it until I studied the forestry really deeply. And channelization, it's horrible. And the monoculture plantation and the mechanized and the chemicalized the rice agriculture and the associated land reform was happening. And those problems, I am not going to delve into the details for this presentation, but these has the secondary issues. The ferality is emerging. That the hybridized boars, they are hybridized between the domestic pigs that are let loose with the giant wild boars. They're scary. And these guys are very smart, and they can get through the electric fences, and then they destroy the rice. They waddle in the other rice paddies and then pee around and then make crop all destroyed. And deers, as you know, deers graze everything on its path, including the monoculture plantation sites. So it's all bare. The forests are so bare. It's really bare on the other ground. Nothing is growing anymore. And these like patchy solutions that you saw in the previous slide, like channelization for the rainstorm management or stormwater management or something like that, and monoculture plantation, like agricultural way of approach of the forestry, and the mechanization for the agriculture and the chemical too. Those solutions, I don't believe in it because I see the result. I don't like it. So I don't play those the solution game. So instead, I decided to listen to the elders who directly has the experience of those old ways of living. My uncle and aunt, they are the last generation who has the direct experience when they were younger. And these feral beings, we can call them vermin, but I don't want to call them vermin. I want to call them messengers from the mountain that we have to listen to. We have to see what they're doing. In that, I thought about your questions about the traditional ecological knowledge and which traditional practices are in use, dormant, or lost. That was the first question that I came up with. And then why are they in use or dormant or lost? And I'm very curious about how have they been able to maintain that are in use right now. And during my self-directed study, I noticed my relatives were talking about the old times and our ancestors and my great-grandpa, with what they were doing in the forest and the rice paddies and the rivers. That's why I wanted to use the traditional ecological knowledge framework to see my village. Those are the questions. And in order to answer those, I took the community engaged autoethnographic approach, and I have conversations with them. And I go into the forest and observe what's left there. And I take photographs. And I read a lot of books and articles of the related topics of my research. And what I did is I basically immersed myself in their daily life and do what they're doing. Like I use the like gasoline operated brush cutter to weed whack around the rice paddies. It's like a really modern way of doing it, but they're still doing it. And then like cleaning around the household, right? And then doing the heavy lifting for the elders. something like that, and eat with them, talk with them. And I do not bring out my field note because one of the participants said like, oh, that's intimidating. So I ditched it. And I just remember what we talked about. And sometimes I record only when they allow me to. And I do the photograph in the same manner. And other thing is I go into the forest. I know this forest because I was growing up in there. And I go into with the lens of the traditional ecological knowledge and looking for the remnants of the traditional practices, right? And then I found in that process is the charcoal kilns. They're all across the forest that my uncle owns. And one of the left is my grandpa's work. One in the middle is a great grandpa's. And then the other one is like super ancient. We don't know who that was, but it's there standing to this day. And especially the one in the middle, probably I can use it now. It's still there, right? And what charcoal making entails is the regulation for the ecosystem cycling by people coppicing. Coppicing is the regenerative harvest method, right? The coppicing, that will keep the forest bright. That will keep the forest canopy open so that forest floor is flourishing with the plants. And animals can have food and they're all in there. And we animals can have food too. And this is a very regenerative practice, and not just for the wood, but all the food and all the cyclings and the nutrient as well. And this traditional practice is not really documented because it is too mundane, I think. It is just so not flashy. People used to do it all everywhere in Japan, right? So we don't have that much of a study on it, right? And I have a niche for that. And charcoal itself touches upon every corners of the Japanese traditional cultures. Say, a tea ceremony has a beautiful charcoals in the middle. Indigo dyeing, silk production, all the cuisines, and other art forms like calligraphies, like pigments. And then I see charcoal, I see charcoal remnants of the coppicing that it's overgrowing. It is really overgrowing because, we are the elements, we are the agents of or the part of the coordination of the forest practice or forest cycling or the ecosystem itself. And then what you are seeing is my grandpa's work, my great grandpa's work, but they're overgrown and closing the canopy and then making it shadowy, really dark, and then wet and accumulated with the forest litter, right? Tree litter. And then what's happening is that there's no ground cover. Nothing is growing on the floor on top of the effects from the grazing of all these deers. Nothing is growing underneath. And then lots of snakes. It's really hard to walk through. It's a sad scene right now. And another thing that I observed, there was the bamboo that is encroaching into the forest. We used to harvest the bamboo shoot for food and the wood for the materials for the tool making and the clothing material and toy making or whatever. It's just like the Western red cedar for the coastal people here. I see a very commonality in here. And then that beautiful basket, I wanted to buy it, but it was not for sale. It is a beautiful art, but it is a utilitarian art. It's really cool to see. It's like the other Western red cedar basket or something like that. So no active participation is happening, both both for the coppicing and the charcoal making and the bamboo. So that the forest is kind of sleepy. It's not awake anymore. And this is one of my probably answer to my questions. That by spending a lot of time with my relatives this time and observing their current practices, I realized that they have been witnessing all the drastic changes throughout their lifetime within the short time of their lifetime. They started as a bricklayer people, make-do people, And then now they're riding on their machines on the rice paddies. They have been adapting to make living somehow. At the same time, they have been trying really hard to keep the ecosystem cycling, except the river. That's really bad. But what I am hopeful for is my elders still hold their traditional knowledge, and then there's the evidence in the forest, and then there are lots of people who are talking about the traditional ecological practices in Japan too. And then when I am listening to them, and they're listening to their stories from the old time, I see them as an instruction for us to plug ourselves back in to this coordination and to reawaken ourselves and then reawaken the forest together. Most significantly though, like those people, my uncle and aunt, they are happy people. They're so like laughing super loud all the time because I think they're connected to the nature still. They're connected to the community. It is a very happy place to be. And I want to introduce you guys really quickly with two people. This person, Mr. Sugino, lives not too far from my ancestors' village, and he practices the charcoal making right now. And then I found his website and I contacted him and then I emailed him, and then he emailed me back with like a really long email. He was really excited that I contacted him from like academia standpoint. And then we met. I was ready for like an hour or two. And I ended up staying whole day, having lunch and the dinner and talking about like a forest ecology, like problems of like a modern conservation or the capitalism or like traditional practices that are diminishing. Like lots of conversation happened. And then I visited him many times. And then at the end, he was saying like, hey, do you want to do the charcoal making with me? Because I know you are planning to go to PhD. Why don't you do it with me? Come back again and then live with me and then to do it. So I got a really great offer, which I was planning to do in my future PhD study. And then that emerged. It's really a conversation. That was really cool. And then he showed me these tools and I found out those are made by the same local blacksmith. The picture on the right, that collection is my ancestors' tools from great-great-grandpa's era. And this is Mr. Sugino's tool. They're made by the same blacksmith family. And then I decided to meet that guy, right? Mr. Hirose, he's the seventh generation heir of this family. And then he offers the knife making workshop. And I decided to participate as a customer. And I went there and talked about the charcoal making culture. And then of course, he uses charcoal too to heat up the metal. And I got to pound on the metal and I made the very sharp knife with him. And then he was really happy to find out that my ancestors were his ancestors' customer. And it's like I worked across the time and space to come back in a full circle, which was a really cool finding. And then I am really looking forward to work with him again. And to close the presentation, I would like to share one example of our ancestors' wisdom. That's me, and that's my great-grandma. And that's my uncle. He's young and strong, but now he's frail. He can't walk as much, but he can walk though. That's a rice paddle. My aunt uses it daily to this day. And she told me that my great-grandma gave it to her. And then she told me that my great-grandma received it from her grandmother. That means great-great-great-grandmother to me. And then that supposedly over 200 years old, that paddle. And then what's cool is that the maker knew which material is perfect for this particular tool. Because rice paddle, if you know, you know. When you scoop the rice, it gets plastered, right? Plastered with glutinous rice. And then when it gets dried, it's really hard to get it off. So that you have to moisten it, right? And then scrape it off with the other brush or something like that. That means it is really resistant for the abrasion. It's really hardy, and then it doesn't rot. Chestnut wood does not rot. It is really dense so that it's really robust. And then the maker must have known it will last long. And here we are. My aunt still uses it 2 centuries later. It is a really cool, like it's just like a manifestation of their wisdom. And I wanted to share with you. And this is my presentation. Thank you so much. One question. Any question? Or the recent generations that are younger than me, like my children. Okay, so I have cousins. That's my cousin, and another one. I can see the leg. Their older one is 60, and the younger one is 55. And they moved out of the village to seek the other urban living. And then they only come weekends to help. And then they know a lot about the other forest. They know about what was happening before, but they're not really keen. They were not keen to learn the other traditional knowledge. But somehow I ignited it, and they're very curious about it, and they're learning from the other, their parents now. So it's kind of like happening right now. And then their kids, they're completely urban people, but they come back to the village and they love the village and they know what kind of weed, like plants that you can use when you have a cut. Like you can grab it, like rub it against. That is a traditional ecological knowledge that they have normally, like naturally, that they're not aware of. And then I'm pointing out to them, like, hey, you know that one. How did you learn? And I'm asking the questions like that. So I am hopeful that it's going to carry on. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Nice to see you.